In the last hour, the death has been announced of the singer George Michael.
George Michael's death is ruled to be due to natural causes, according to a British coroner.
His publicist has said he passed away peacefully at home.
He sold more than 80 million records worldwide.
On April 7, 1998, the lights of Beverly Hills cast long shadows across the quiet streets as a solitary figure walked into a public restroom in Will Rogers Memorial Park, unaware that within minutes his name would be thrust into a global scandal that would stain headlines, split public opinion, and ignite a media frenzy that would follow him for the rest of his life. The arrest that took place that night shattered the barrier between his carefully constructed public persona and the private world he had fought so long to protect. Reporters swarmed the scene before dawn, cameras flashing against the tiled walls, feeding the tabloids with a story so sensational that it threatened to swallow the man behind it. This was the night the world saw George Michael not as a legend, but as a mystery unraveled, a global icon with all his vulnerabilities suddenly exposed under the cold, fluorescent glow of unwanted truth. Long before that scandal became a turning point, his life began far from Hollywood in the quiet surroundings of East Finchley in London on June 25, 1963, when Georgios Kyriakos Panayotou entered the world as the son of a Cypriot restaurateur and an English dancer. His childhood home stood at the intersection of two cultures that shaped him in different ways. One, loud and proud, with Mediterranean passion, the other quiet and reserved with British restraint. His father's ambitions were practical and stern, built on long hours of work and the belief that success came from discipline. His mother, soft-spoken yet spiritually fierce, carried within her a dancer's sensitivity, a way of seeing the world through movement, emotion, and subtlety. From her, he inherited a sense of artistry that glowed like an ember waiting to be fanned into flame. Growing up, George was not the radiant star the world would one day know. He was shy, often withdrawn, hiding behind oversized glasses and a curtain of insecurity. School corridors were places where he felt invisible, overshadowed by louder children, haunted by the uneasy awareness of being different. Music became his escape, a quiet sanctuary where he could disappear into melodies and find pieces of himself in the voices coming through worn vinyl speakers. Records spun late into the night, filling the house with the soulful sounds of Motown and the emotional power of Elton John, laying the foundation for the artist he would one day become. When the family moved to Radlett in Hertfordshire, the shift was more than geographic. It was psychological. The new environment placed him among more affluent classmates, amplifying the insecurities he already carried. Yet something stirred in him during these years, a spark born from solitude and longing. He began to dream of a life beyond the boundaries of suburban England, imagining applause, lights, and stages where people would finally look at him and see something special. In his early teens, George discovered that music wasn't just an escape, but a calling. He spent hours writing lyrics in cramped notebooks, experimenting with melodies on borrowed instruments, and studying the structure of songs as if decoding the blueprint of emotion itself. At age 15, in 1978, fate intervened when he met Andrew Ridgeley, a charismatic and confident classmate who recognized the potential hidden beneath George's quiet demeanor. Their friendship formed instantly, a pairing of conviction and curiosity, two boys who believed they could turn dreams into reality if they dared enough. Together, they started small. They formed short-lived bands with makeshift equipment and played at school events, experimenting with sounds, building chemistry, and learning the rhythms of performance. Money was scarce, equipment was borrowed, and early gigs were awkward. But George's voice began to rise above the limitations around him. Even in those clumsy first attempts, there was a texture in his tone, a sincerity that drew people in, an emotional clarity rare for someone so young. The late 1970s were not easy for him. He struggled with the conflicting pressures of cultural expectations, social identity, and a growing awareness of desires he didn't yet know how to name. According to people close to him, this was a time marked by confusion and internal conflict, a sense of being out of sync with the world around him. His parents worried about his future, unsure of how a boy so fragile and introspective would survive the harshness of adulthood. Yet George had already found the one compass he could trust: music. By 1981, after years of small projects and growing artistic vision, the pieces finally aligned. George and Andrew officially formed a duo that would soon define a generation. They had no money, no real plan, and no guarantee of success, but they had chemistry, ambition, and a hunger far stronger than fear. George began to transform from a shy boy into a driven creator, meticulously working on lyrics, harmonies, and arrangements, determined to break free from the limitations of his upbringing. Andrew, bold and charismatic, became the face of their early hustle, talking their way into meetings, pushing doors open, and believing in their potential even when the industry didn't. George was changing on the inside, too. Fame was still a distant dream, but he felt its pull, an intoxicating whisper promising identity, validation, escape. This was the beginning of the metamorphosis, a shift from obscurity into the first glimmers of stardom. Yet beneath the growing confidence, shadows remained. He still hid the insecurities that gnawed at him, still struggled with the private truths he felt too unsafe to reveal. Fame would amplify everything: his talent, his beauty, his charisma, but it would also amplify the secrets he fought to control. By the start of 1982, the world around George Michael began to shift with an almost gravitational force, drawing him toward the stage he had once only imagined. In the privacy of his bedroom, he and Andrew Ridgeley had named their duo Wham, a word that felt explosive, bold, and reckless enough to carry the dream they had stitched together through years of friendship and restless ambition. The name promised impact, and George was determined to deliver it. He poured himself into songwriting, crafting melodies with the precision of someone who understood that sound could open doors no key ever could. His confidence in the studio grew as swiftly as the transformation in his appearance. The shy boy with thick glasses and uncertainty began to shed his old skin, stepping into a persona built from style, swagger, and a glowing star power he had kept hidden for years. Their first major opportunity arrived when Intervision Records agreed to release their music, and the moment their debut single hit the airwaves in June 1982, the world felt a shift. Wham Rap was rebellious, youthful, and unapologetic, reflecting the restless pulse of a generation tired of conformity. George, still barely known, could feel the ground beneath him tremble with possibility. But it was in October 1982 that a turning point emerged, when Young Guns, Go For It, pushed them onto national television. The song's appearance on Top of the Pops ignited something electric. The audience responded with enthusiasm, but more importantly, the industry finally began to see Wham as more than just another duo. They were a cultural spark flickering into flame. By 1983, that spark became an eruption. The release of their debut album, Fantastic, marked the beginning of George Michael's evolution from young dreamer into the voice of a global youth culture. The songs were bright and defiant, filled with the energy of boys who felt invincible, and the world embraced them without hesitation. George found himself on magazine covers, his voice echoing across dance floors, his image plastered on bedroom walls. Fame arrived like a tidal wave, sweeping him into a life of flashing cameras, overwhelming attention, and a new awareness of his own power. Yet the higher he climbed, the more he felt the delicate tremors of insecurity beneath his feet. On stage, he radiated brightness, but backstage, he carried questions he didn't know how to ask aloud. Everything changed again on July 9th, 1984, with the release of Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. The song did more than top charts. It became a cultural phenomenon, a piece of pure joy at a time when the world needed color. George, with neon short hair and a smile that felt as bright as sunlight, became a pop prince. Cameras adored him, fans screamed for him, and radio stations played his voice around the clock. But behind that glowing image, another part of him was forming, a deeper artistic instinct, a seriousness contrasting with the bright gloss of Wham. He had begun to feel the first confinements of the persona he had built. Being the cheerful pop idol was a role he played well, but it was only a fraction of who he truly was. As Wham continued to dominate charts through late 1984 and 1985, George's songwriting matured at a pace no one expected. Careless Whisper, released on July 24, 1984, revealed a different side of him, a more soulful, aching depth, rooted in emotion rather than spectacle. The iconic saxophone line became a cultural melody, instantly recognizable, and the world understood that George Michael was not merely a pop star. He was an artist with a voice that held stories too heavy to be contained in bubblegum pop. The song's success created a silent tension within Wham. George was evolving faster than the duo around him. The cheerful facade no longer fit the complexity stirring inside him. By 1985, as Wham embarked on international tours, George felt both the thrill and the burden of global stardom. The world saw perfection, a charismatic performer, a golden voice, and a seemingly effortless rise. But he was beginning to fracture under the weight of secrets he feared would destroy everything he had built. According to sources close to him, this was the period when he wrestled most intensely with questions of identity, desire, and belonging. The spotlight magnified his fears, and every magazine cover felt like a reminder of the distance between the man he was and the man he pretended to be. The turning point came on June 28, 1986, under the open sky of Wembley Stadium, where Wham performed their final concert. The energy of the crowd was electrifying, a roaring testament to the duo's impact on a generation. Yet for George, the night carried a bittersweet undercurrent. As he sang, he felt the chapter closing before his eyes. He knew he had to step into the next phase alone if he wanted to grow. Beneath the cheers, the applause, and the bright lights, he felt a strange mixture of liberation and fear. He was saying goodbye to the partnership that had shaped his youth, stepping into a future defined entirely by his own vision. The transition into his solo career felt like both a rebirth and a burden. George understood that the world expected greatness, and he expected even more from himself. When he entered the studio to craft his first solo album, he approached the project with an obsessive precision that surprised even those closest to him. He wanted to prove that he was more than a pop phenomenon. He wanted to create something timeless. His voice deepened in tone, his lyrics sharpened with emotional truth, and the persona he crafted for this new chapter carried an aura of maturity and depths that set him apart from the polished pop star he once was. Faith arrived on October 30th, 1987, and with it came a level of fame that blurred the lines between triumph and imprisonment. The album wasn't just a success, it became a cultural force, transforming George Michael into one of the most powerful voices of the decade. The songs pulsed with confidence, sensuality, and vulnerability, capturing the contradictions that defined him. He toured the world, watched his image morph into an icon, and realized that the fame he had longed for carried a darkness he had not anticipated. Crowds adored him, but in private, he confronted a growing loneliness, a fear that his true self was slipping further from sight. With every award, with every record broken, the public fell deeper in love with the image of George Michael. But the man inside that image was beginning to suffocate. The world saw a star soaring at the peak of his power, but he felt trapped by expectations he could never fully meet. He feared the consequences of being honest about who he was. Compassion and understanding were rare in a time when secrets could destroy careers. The more famous he became, the more carefully he guarded the truths that shaped his inner world. As the world danced to the rhythms of faith throughout 1988, George Michael found himself suspended between triumph and torment. The album had transformed him into a global icon, but the price of that ascent was becoming unbearable. Everywhere he went, crowds reached for him as if he were an apparition of perfection, a symbol carved from desire and fantasy rather than a human being. The leather jacket, the stubble, the cool swagger, the provocative confidence, all of it was crafted with precision, yet none of it reflected the man who lay awake at night, questioning the foundations of his own identity. The spotlight magnified the distance between truth and illusion, and George began to sense that the very persona that elevated him was slowly erasing him. As 1989 arrived, the cracks beneath the surface began to widen. He wanted artistic freedom, emotional honesty, and the kind of expression that transcended commercial expectations, but his label demanded another faith, another global phenomenon, another chapter of the same glittering narrative. In private, George felt split between duty and authenticity. The pressure triggered a deep exhaustion that he carried silently, performing with mechanical brilliance while his spirit drifted further into shadows. According to people close to him, this was the period when his internal conflict grew sharper, fueled by the fear that revealing his true self could destroy everything he had built. The early 1990s brought an unexpected shift. George entered a relationship that changed the course of his emotional life. When he met Anselmo Filippa in 1991, something in him awakened, a gentle flicker of hope, a sense of being seen not as a star, but as a soul, longing for connection. Their bond was quiet yet profound, offering George a glimpse of happiness he had never allowed himself to imagine. But fate, always unpredictable, dealt a devastating blow. During the Rock in Rio concert on January 27, 1991, George delivered one of the most powerful performances of his career, unaware that the joy he felt was shadowed by tragedy waiting just beyond the horizon. Months later, Anselmo confided that he had tested HIV positive. News shattered George in ways he could never publicly express. The fear of losing someone so dear collided with the terror of a world still drenched in stigma. He carried the weight of this secret in silence, unable to reveal the truth to fans, or even close friends. While the world celebrated his musical achievements, George struggled with the emotional storm tearing through his private life. Every moment of joy became tinged with dread, every expression of love overshadowed by the fragility of time slipping through his fingers. By March 1993, the inevitable happened. Anselmo Filippa passed away, leaving George devastated, hollowed out by grief so profound he could not speak it aloud. Interviews from this period show him distant, fragile, and searching for meaning in a world that suddenly felt cruel and indifferent. He poured his heartbreak into his music, crafting an unspoken tribute through raw emotion and haunting melodies. Yet to the public, the silence surrounding his loss was misinterpreted, often reduced to rumors and speculation. No one knew that behind the calm exterior was a man mourning the great love of his life. The grief transformed him. He became more introspective, more deliberate, more determined to reclaim control over his identity and his artistry. This resolve led him into a monumental battle with his record label, culminating on October 15, 1992, when he filed a lawsuit against Sony Music. The case became a public spectacle, a confrontation between a star longing for liberation and an industry determined to bind him. George's arguments were passionate and layered with the frustration of years spent feeling creatively imprisoned. The legal battle drained him, emotionally and financially, but it also revealed the intensity of his conviction. He refused to be a prisoner of his own success. Throughout 1993 and 1994, George's public appearances became rare, his interviews guarded, his energy subdued by the heavy cocktail of grief, exhaustion, and legal warfare. His fans sensed a shift, unsure whether he was retreating temporarily or disappearing into solitude for good. The press, hungry for scandal, began to circle with growing aggression. Without understanding the private heartbreak shaping his silence, tabloids speculated endlessly about his personal life, twisting shadows into stories and doubt into headlines. The world had seen George Michael soar to the highest peaks of fame, but this was the first time it saw him retreat, wounded and uncertain. His music still resonated, but he struggled to find stability within himself. The death of Anselmo lingered like a haunting presence. The legal battle drained him further. The pressure to maintain a public image he no longer connected with weighed on him like a stone atop his chest. According to sources who knew him intimately, this period marked the beginning of subtle behaviors that hinted at deeper internal fractures, the kind of cracks that fame could amplify but never heal. Still, despite the darkness surrounding him, creativity remained his lifeline. In the studio, George crafted songs that reflected the emotional scars of his journey, capturing grief, love, and disillusionment with remarkable vulnerability. But outside the safety of music, his life grew increasingly complicated. The dual existence he led, public icon versus private sufferer, was reaching a breaking point, and that breaking point would arrive sooner than anyone expected, under the harsh lights of a small Los Angeles park, on a night that would become one of the most famous scandals in modern music history. On April 7, 1998, the calm of Beverly Hills was shattered when George Michael was arrested in a public restroom at Will Rogers Memorial Park. The night air was thick with tension, the shadows of the palm trees stretching long and thin, as if the city itself were watching, waiting for the drama to unfold. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning, casting fractured reflections across the cold tiles. Reporters scribbled furiously. Photographers aimed their lenses, and within hours, the world would see a star stripped bare, his private life exposed in a moment that seemed to hang suspended between scandal and tragedy. It was a collision of fame, secrecy, and desire, the kind of event that leaves an indelible mark on both the person and the public imagination. The arrest itself was only the surface of a life that had long been lived in duality. George had learned early that to survive in the world, he had to construct a persona, vibrant, confident, untouchable, that shielded the delicate, vulnerable core beneath. The fluorescent-lit restroom became a theater for that collision, a symbolic stage where the private truths he had long hidden clashed violently with the gaze of the world. Overnight, whispers turned to headlines and speculation to judgment. Friends and strangers alike tried to understand the man who had once been the voice of joy, now portrayed through the lens of scandal and shame. In that instant, fame became a mirror reflecting both adoration and condemnation, and George Michael found himself navigating the impossible task of reconciling the two. In the months that followed, the consequences rippled outward. The press speculated endlessly about his sexuality, his habits, and his inner life, constructing narratives that only partially aligned with the truth. Sources close to him later revealed the profound sense of betrayal and humiliation he experienced, a crushing weight for someone who had spent decades building trust between art and audience. Yet, in private, George refused to be completely consumed. He channeled his frustration, anger, and sorrow into his music, crafting lyrics and melodies that were raw and intimate, a clandestine diary for anyone capable of listening beneath the glamour. His creativity became both armor and lifeline, a means to reclaim control in a world that seemed eager to define him on its own terms. Even as the scandal dominated tabloids, George's professional life could not be paused indefinitely. The release of songs from the last century in 1999 showcased an artist unafraid to confront vulnerability head-on, blending standards and jazz-infused interpretations with a voice that had grown richer, more textured, and imbued with the weight of experience. Critics noted the contrast between his public image as a pop icon and the depth of artistry he displayed in private, the tension between spectacle and substance becoming ever more apparent. Behind the camera flashes and gossip columns, George continued to explore the duality of fame, constantly balancing the seductive allure of public approval with the existential cost it demanded. The turn of the millennium brought more challenges and a renewed confrontation with mortality. Reports of health concerns, substance struggles, and personal loss dotted the headlines, often exaggerated but rooted in kernels of truth. Friends and collaborators recalled long nights spent navigating the turbulent waters of George's emotions, where moments of brilliance were intertwined with episodes of despair. He was a man who had scaled the heights of adulation, yet constantly measured his worth against the unforgiving mirror of public perception. The very qualities that had drawn audiences, charisma, vulnerability, intensity, also rendered him susceptible to criticism and scrutiny. In 2004, another incident in London led to yet more public attention when George was arrested following an encounter in a vehicle. The event was sensationalized in the press, reinforcing the narrative of a star in conflict with himself and society. Yet, beneath the headlines, there was a man wrestling with loneliness, longing, and the enduring need to be understood on his own terms. Friends later described this period as one of introspection, a time when George withdrew selectively, choosing only the relationships and experiences that nurtured rather than exploited him. His music continued to serve as a conduit for expression, every note and lyric revealing traces of the private struggles that had become inseparable from his public persona. Despite the controversies, George Michael's artistic brilliance remained undeniable. Performances at venues like the Royal Albert Hall, intimate acoustic sets, and carefully curated appearances reminded the world that he was not merely a celebrity shaped by scandal, but a consummate artist whose voice could still move hearts. Yet the specter of public judgment lingered, a constant companion that reminded him how precarious life in the spotlight could be. Every interaction, every public appearance, became a negotiation between self-preservation and the inevitability of exposure. By the late 2000s, George had embraced a measure of reconciliation with his past. While he never sought the spotlight with the same intensity as before, he used his platform to support causes close to his heart, championing human rights and advocating for understanding in the face of stigma. The man who had once felt trapped by fame now navigated it with a cautious wisdom, aware of its dangers yet unwilling to abandon the music that defined him. The juxtaposition of vulnerability and resilience became the defining theme of his later years, a testament to the complexity of a life lived in constant negotiation between public expectation and private reality. In the years that followed, George Michael lived in a quiet tension between the love of his fans and the scrutiny of the world. He released music that bore the weight of his experiences, each note a testament to resilience, grief, and longing. Private struggles with health and loss marked his later life, but he remained fiercely devoted to authenticity and artistic truth. His generosity, activism, and courage to embrace his identity left an indelible mark on music and culture. On December 25, 2016, the world mourned the sudden passing of George Michael. The public remembered the icon, the voice that defined generations, the energy that once lit up every stage, while those who knew him best recalled the deeply human man beneath the fame. Vulnerable, brilliant, and endlessly complex, his legacy endures in the music, the memories, and the mysteries that surround a life lived fully, yet never fully understood. The echo of his voice remains haunting, beautiful, and timeless.